Good morning, everybody. Say, for those of you who are in here right now, if you want to go to the Files section on Canvas, and in the files, in the lecture PowerPoints folder, there will be a new PDF for this new unit today. Hello, good morning. Hello there. Hello there, everybody. Well, we have 12 people in here, so I'm going to get started because it is 7:40 now, 7:41. Couple of things. First of all, just to be aware, it's going to take me a little bit to get through grading the tests. So just give me time on that. It's one of those things where, it takes time to read through it and make sure that I'm grading it the right way and so on. And then today is a very busy day for me. So, if you could just have some patience, and I'll try and have them done by the end of the week here. But, Wednesdays are a really difficult day for me. I teach basically starting now all the way up until 9 p.m. tonight. So I will not have a lot of time to get to those today, but I will grade them and put them in the grade book as soon as I'm able. Today we're going to be starting the new unit. There will be a new reading assignment, so that'll be the assignment for homework due for Friday. Is there anyone at this point that doesn't have a book? If you don't have a book, you do need to let me know as soon as possible, because you're going to need the book to do the reading assignment. So, yeah. Everybody got a book? I'm not seeing anyone chatting, so I'm going to assume that everybody has a book, which is good. So what I will do is I'll put up the reading assignment for today and the questions that will go along with that section of the book. Okay, cool. All right. If you want to follow along on the PowerPoint that we're going to be going through today, you just have to go to Canvas. I always recommend using the PowerPoint as we go along. I still haven't been given the admin privileges on the computer, so I still can't screen share yet at my work computer. But if you go to Files in Canvas, go to Files in Canvas and then click on Lecture PowerPoints. And you should see a new PowerPoint on there called the Protestant Reformation, which is Unit 2 of our course, and we are going to get started talking about that today. So, Protestant Reformation. Last unit, when we were talking about the Renaissance, we started talking about some of the things that were going on in the Catholic Church. And, the Catholic Church had been an institution that had been around by this point for a pretty long time. And, as a result of that, and, here's the thing, there's a famous quote that goes something to the effect of, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. All right. And when we think about what that means, when we think about no matter who or what institution possesses political and social and so on authority, economic authority and what have you, the more authority that person gets, the more corrupt they typically become. It's kind of like the Lord of the Rings sort of a thing. You put the ring on and it automatically starts like corrupting you, like Gollum or something. And so the Roman Catholic Church had been the dominant structure of all of European society for a long time by the time that we get to the 1500s. And there had been a number of practices going on kind of behind closed doors at the upper echelons of the Roman Catholic Church, where the people at the top of the power structure of the church, the popes, the cardinals and so on, they were engaging in some not so good practices. And when we talk about corruption, we're talking about practices that are inherently unfair, or just not the way that you want your society run. And so this first part of this assignment, or not assignment, but this PowerPoint rather, I want you to be thinking about this from the perspective of argument formation. Because what I'm going to be doing is making the assertion that the cause of the Protestant Reformation came as a byproduct of protesting, which is the root word of Protestant Reformation, is protest, right? They're protesting these practices going on in the church that have somehow diminished church authority. They've somehow created a situation where people are upset about the practices of the church. And so we're going to be talking about various causes, big idea causes, and then I'm going to be giving you evidence to support my argument. So, when I'm presenting this information to you, this is information that's historically sound, because I'm providing you with specific pieces of evidence to substantiate the argument that I'm making, that the whole reason the Protestant Reformation happens is as a reaction to some of the things that were going on with the Catholic Church that people didn't like, okay? And I can make that claim, but without providing you pieces of evidence to support that claim or substantiate that claim is no better than any other opinion. So the thing that makes a really good historical argument is that you're providing specific pieces of evidence that you can point to say, hey, this is some good evidence, to back up my claim that the church was doing some things, or some happenings of the church had resulted in people beginning to question the authority of the church and the practices of the church. So the first major claim that I'm going to make here is that one cause of the Protestant Reformation, I'm on slide 2 now of the PowerPoint, one claim that I would argue diminishes the prestige of the clergy is all of the crises that surrounded the church in the 14th and 15th century. And I can point to a few of them. The Avignon papacy is one, where you had a pope and an anti-pope, and they both excommunicated each other. Excuse me. Pardon me, I'm so sorry. And then you had this schism in the church, right? The split in the church, which is a product that, they're kind of related ideas, but the Avignon papacy and the Great Schism is where you see this big split in the church, and that doesn't look good, right? That doesn't look good for the church, because there's this, it's almost like, imagine if whatever, major company, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, whatever, if there was some giant split in the company, and the company that you have two different CEOs of the company who have each called out the other CEO as being a not legitimate CEO, and it just doesn't look good, right? It looks bad, because it makes it seem like there's a lot of conflict within the church. The other thing is this conciliar movement that happened. The conciliar movement was an attempt to reform the church and give the church council more power than the pope, and that got rejected by several popes in the 15th and 16th century. So the church, again, like refusing to make changes that might prevent some of these other schisms from happening in the future, hurt their prestige. And then the Renaissance papacy, where you had the Borgia Pope and the kinds of things that he was doing. And then the wars, right? The warrior pope, and how the pope essentially became the most like secular military leader of the papal states in some of the Italian conflicts against the French in the 14 and into the 1500s. So these kinds of things just don't look particularly good for the church. The other thing is, now I'm moving on to slide 3. the corruption within the church, right? You had this thing called simony that was going on, and simony was essentially the sale of church offices to the highest bidder. So rather than choosing people who were, truly pious and good, religious figures, they started selling offices to the highest bidder, which meant that you got people in there who may have had a whole lot of money, but may not have been the best people for the job. And so, for example, in 1487, this is where the evidence comes in, the Pope sold 24 offices, okay, in 1487 alone. And that doesn't look good, right? Because you're basically saying, I'll hire whoever pays me the most. And that's not what the church is supposed to be about. Reformers were outraged, okay, that unqualified people became high-ranking figures of bishops or cardinals within the Roman Catholic Church, whose record as as religious figures wasn't very good. They were people who probably really weren't right for the job and were power hungry, and they really wanted the title of bishop or cardinal for the sake of political prestige, not because they cared about the tenets of the church. Another form of corruption that happens within the church is something called pluralism. If you think of a plural, all a plural is like multiple of something, right? So goose is a singular, geese is a plural, right? Many geese, okay? Pluralism in the church, in terms of what that means, is holding more than one office at a time. So if you were a church figure and you held multiple church offices, okay, you could be receiving multiple pay. It would be like, for me, right, because I teach 4 different classes at the high school, I took 4 different titles. I'm an AP Euro teacher, I'm a regular world history teacher, I'm an AP research teacher, and an AP seminar teacher, and then somehow like demanding that I get paid for each of those positions separately. And that would be right. That would be unfair, because there are other teachers who may not teach as many classes as I do, but work just as many hours as I do, right? And so, but they would maybe only be able to claim salary for 1 or 2 classes. So pluralism isn't good either, right? Holding multiple church offices at a time. Absenteeism is another problem within the church, which is where if you had an official that was not participating in benefices, but receiving payment and privileges as though they were. Benefices are just church offices, essentially. So let's say that you're like, you don't even really hold the job. You're on like, if you've ever heard of like a leave of absence, right? You get put on partial pay if you're on a leave of absence or something for sickness or pregnancy or whatever it is. And absenteeism is like, if you have an official who holds a position, but they're not even really showing up for the job, they're not even really doing anything, but they're still receiving all the payments and privileges that go along with their position without even really showing up and doing any work. And again, that doesn't look good, right? People are going to look at that and be like, what are you doing? That's not a good practice, right? The other thing that they started doing after the Black Death is that the church had widened the concept of something called purgatory, okay? And so I'm on slide 4 now. This concept of purgatory, think of it as almost like the waiting room in the doctor's office, okay? Before it's determined, in the doctor's office, you're going to go back, and you don't know what's going to happen yet. You don't know, okay, am I sick with something? What's wrong with me? Do I have a broken arm? Whatever it is. Okay, whatever you're going to the doctor's office for, it could go either way. Well, in purgatory, it could go either way in the sense that you could either go to heaven or hell. And so the thing with this was that the church decided to expand this concept of purgatory because in the Roman Catholic Church, one of the practices that they have is the 7 sacraments. And the last sacrament that people are supposed to receive in their life is, like their last rites, basically. Like as you're dying, the priest or whoever blesses you, forgives you of your sins, okay? And because people were dying in such huge numbers so rapidly from the plague in the 1340s, 50s, okay, what happened was that a lot of people were dying without receiving their last sacrament. And so the church said, well, what we'll do is we'll widen the concept of purgatory. That way people aren't concerned that their loved ones are just going straight to hell because they didn't receive their final or their last rites from the priest. And so they created kind of this idea of this or very greatly expanded this idea of this notion of purgatory, which is like a place where a person goes before it's determined, what the fate of your salvation will be. The idea being that the church would be able to benefit from this, from the sale of what were known as indulgences. So people would pay money to the church to absolve their sins or the sins of their loved ones who had maybe departed really unexpectedly or quickly from the plague. And one of the priests that became really well known for doing this was a German priest by the name of Johann Tetzel. And Johann Tetzel and his practice of collecting indulgences for the sake of expanding the wealth of the church really infuriated this other guy, a lower level monk by the name of Martin Luther, who was flipping through his Bible, searching for anything that he could find pertaining to the notion of the church selling indulgences for the forgiveness of sins, and he couldn't find it. So there was no biblical. Now remember, most people at this time are not particularly well read, but Martin Luther was an educated man. He was also very, very, very devout Catholic originally. And so, he essentially calls out the church for this practice of sale of indulgences, and we'll talk more about that later on in the PowerPoint today. Another thing that was happening is something called nepotism, and there was a question about this in the reading guide last time, where what is nepotism? It's basically favoring family members in the appointment of church offices. And we still see nepotism even today in private companies, but even in government, where, our own president right now, Donald Trump, has appointed several people who are family members into positions that are, high-ranking governmental bureaucratic positions. So his daughter, his daughter's husband, and so on and so forth, have been kind of put into these positions that give them quite a bit of authority. And nepotism is something that's generally frowned upon because it's like maybe they're only getting that job because they're related to whoever is in power giving them that job. And that is the case with the church at this time, where you had two popes, Leo X and Clement VII, who were sons of Florentine Medici rulers. Also, the Borgia Pope was very nepotistic. Pope Paul III made two of his grandsons cardinals. So these are guys, usually cardinals are very elderly members of the Roman Catholic Church who have been serving in the church in some capacity or another for a very long time. So if you're making your grandsons, who may only be, I don't know, their teens or 20s, cardinals, it's kind of like they didn't really pay their dues. They just got the job because of the Pope and him favoring his own family members in terms of putting people in those positions. So nepotism. Another reason that people started to want to reform the Catholic Church or protest against the Catholic Church is because of the moral decline of the papacy. And the Borgia Pope is probably the best example of this, because the Borgia Pope, otherwise known as Pope Alexander VI, who reigned from 1492 into 1503, had numerous affairs and children out of wedlock. He was engaged in a lot of very not Pope-like behavior. For those of you that know anything about the Roman Catholic Church, people who are supposed to, be high-ranking church officials, but even low-ranking church officials, are supposed to live a life of celibacy and reject, pleasures of the body and stuff like that. And this Pope simply, did not do that. Also, there was this unusual situation with, I think it was his daughter. Her name was Lucretia, if I remember right. there was just really bad stuff going on. And so and then another example of evidence is 20% of all priests in the Diocese of Trent kept concubines. What a concubine is it's essentially a form of sex slavery during the 16th century. 30% of land in Europe was under church control, church ownership. So the church was very, very, very wealthy, bordering on greedy, because they had so much land. And land equals wealth in Europe at this time. So that, again, causes people to kind of question the morality of the church. And then you just have plain old clerical ignorance. Clerical ignorance refers to the idea that you had a whole bunch of people who were serving in church capacities that were virtually illiterate. They couldn't even read or understand the Latin that they would do in the liturgy or in their sermons or from the Bible. And some abused their power too. Like you had various popes and others who were, or even priests, trading sexual favors for the absolution of sins during confession. So we're seeing a major, major moral degradation of the church and it abusing its authority. And, I wish I could tell you that it didn't happen anymore, but it just plainly does. And there's been countless news stories over the course of the last however many years, going back, not even that long ago, within the last few years, but certainly within the last 50 years, of church officials abusing kids and sexual abuse and all this other stuff, and it's just really bad. Okay, it's not good, and they're abusing their position of authority for their own profligate behaviors. And so it's not good. All right, so you start to see more critics of the church come out of the woodworks. And they really, Martin Luther doesn't come out of nowhere. Okay, Martin Luther was, living at the right time to be able to capitalize on the sentiments that he shared with people who came before him. So we need to understand that Martin Luther doesn't just come out of nothing. All right, Martin Luther is a guy who had been influenced by others who had become critical of the behaviors of the church in previous centuries. So Martin Luther doesn't protest the church until 1517. But we're going to be looking at a number of people who come as far back as the mid 1300s, who were aware of some of these things that were going on in the church and started to really question it. Now, one of the things that you will see in common amongst these reformers is that they all live quite a distance away from Rome. Rome, of course, is it's basically the central location of the church, right? It's almost kind of think of it almost like a capital with a country, right? Washington, D.C. is the center of government for the United States. Well, Rome was in some sense, the capital of the Roman Catholic Church, right? And these reformers, these critics of the church, start to come out and question the church, right? And some of its practices. And the first one that we're going to look at here is John Wycliffe. And many of these critics of the church believed in a personal relationship with God as their primary emphasis of their faith, rather than the human social structures of the church itself. So, spiritual authority here is being questioned, right? These guys are saying the only true spiritual authority is God, okay? And the Roman Catholic Church's authorities are merely humans who make mistakes. And so John Wycliffe from England, once again, think how far away, and in particular in this time, England is from the Roman Catholic Church. John Wycliffe started stating that the Bible should be the sole authority. And one of the reasons that he says that is because if you think about the Roman Catholic Church and the fact that the Bible in his day was all still written in Latin and stuff, some priests may not have even understood the Latin that they were reading, but even for those that did, one of the tendencies of the church was to take passages from the Bible, and the Roman Catholic Church had a much looser interpretation of the Bible than the Protestant faiths do. The Protestant faiths tend to take the Bible very, very, very literally. Well, it stands to reason that, the Bible was written over the course of a few centuries, and it was, written by several different people, and it stands to reason that with the amount of time that had passed, the Bible and the stuff that the Bible said, the Roman Catholic Church took some of these stories, parables of the Bible, which were supposed to be, in their view, more symbolic than literal, and start to, say, well, in this story, here's what happens, and here's how it kind of relates to your situation. And so they were taking the Bible in a much more like loose, elastic connotation to make it more applicable to the times that they were living in, because the Bible was written under a totally different, historical discourse than the late Middle Ages Renaissance era. And so some of these priests started loosely interpreting the Bible so to better make it fit with the society that they were living in, 1400 years after it was written. So, but John Wycliffe says no. Okay, we need to stick to what the Bible says literally. Now, there's kind of two perspectives that you can take on this. The one is to say, well, if we take the Bible more literally, obviously we're going to see a much more stricter interpretation of the tenets of the Christian faith than the Roman Catholic Church was. So in some sense, it is bringing some degree of sanctity back to the church. It's bringing back some of the moral foundations of the church. But on the other hand, you're also interpreting the text that was written on the pages of the Bible in a way that may or may not fit as well with with everyday life, in modern times. And so, what we have to understand about the Protestant Reformation, usually when we talk about that word reform, we're talking about progress in the sense that we're moving forward and changing things to better fit with our times. And the thing that becomes a little confusing sometimes for AP European history students is that when we talk about the Protestant Reformation, really when we're talking about the reform that these Protestant reformers are making, the reform is oriented towards bringing the church back to a more strict, conservative, in many ways much more difficult Christian lifestyle than most Christians were living in the early 1400s prior to the start of the Protestant Reformation. So this is a very conservative reform where they're trying to reform the church to, like, in some sense, make the church great again, if you want to, use a modern day connotation. They're trying to, the changes that they're making are trying to bring things back to the way that they used to be before all of these kind of corruptive influences started to take place in the church. So it's not an easy argument to put forth in this time, because the church has such an amazing amount of power over people and influence over the hearts and minds of their worshipers. To question the church in a time when it was expected that everyone was uniform is going to bring a lot of suspicion upon these people. And it would be very easy for the church to, in kind of the weight of the church and the power that the church holds, to crush these people, to slander these people, to, soil their names and ruin their reputation. And because, the church does not want people questioning its authority. But indeed, you have these very conservative members of the church who say, we can't keep going the way that it's been going. The church is out of hand. We've lost our way. The people running the church are misguided, and they're engaging in behaviors that are inappropriate for the church, and so on and so forth. So the Bible being the sole authority is a big factor in a lot of these, that's shared amongst a lot of these reformers of the church at this time. And this very much foreshadowed Martin Luther's views in the early 16th century, a couple hundred years later. He also stressed a personal communion with God, that people need a personal relationship with God, not just a relationship with God via their church superiors, their clerical superiors within the Roman Catholic Church. So the foundation of your relationship with God should be a personal one, according to these guys, not one that is somehow filtered through the knowledge, the authority of spiritual figures here on earth. They also started to diminish the importance of the sacraments. That is, that they said that the sacraments were not as important, okay, as members of the church made them out to be. And one of the reasons that they do that is precisely because of that whole sale of indulgences things that starts to pick up. The other thing that we see at this time is that the Bible starts to be translated into vernaculars, local vernaculars, languages that people spoke at the time, rather than always being written in Latin, all right? And the reason that that's important is because there were probably more people who understood and could learn their local spoken vernacular, whether that be English or German or Italian or whatever, rather than having to learn a completely foreign ancient language that was dead and no one used anymore in Latin, okay, outside of like the upper educated wealthy classes that could speak Latin. But other than that, most worshipers weren't able to read any language or write in any language, even the one that they spoke in. But it's obviously going to be easier to read and write in a language that you speak than it is in a language that you don't understand at all. So John Wycliffe ended up developing a group of followers, and they were known as the Lollards, and he continued his ideas. They continued his ideas all the way up until the 16th century. Another major church figure was a guy by the name of Jan Hus. Okay, Jan Hus was a Czech, which, remember, Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, and the country of Slovakia today are two separate nation states, but the land that they're on existed, obviously, but they weren't really called Czechoslovakia at that time. It was part of a state in the Holy Roman Empire known as Bohemia. Okay, maybe you've ever heard of the not Prince, what's the name? Queen. Queen song Bohemian Rhapsody, right? Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Caught in a landslide, no escape from reality. Right? You guys know that song? Anyway, Bohemia. That's referring to the current areas of, and yes, you're welcome for doing that little solo for you. Now, moving on. What was I even saying? I don't even know what I was saying. Oh yeah, so Bohemia existed over the lands of the Czech Republic. Okay, what is now the modern day Czech Republic, and Jan Hus came from this region, Bohemia. All right, and his ideas were similar to Wycliffe. All right, John Wycliffe, okay, and so this religious leader of Bohemia led a nationalist-led movement there, and he ends up getting burned at the stake for his view. And Jan Hus was known for giving these fiery sermons that really called the higher ups out in the church, right? He called them out. He was saying, the church is filled with sinners and da-da-da-da-da, and people would gather for miles to come and listen to Jan Hus's sermons, because he was really a talented public speaker, and kind of your everyday common worshipers, they loved him, all right? And they related to his views because these worshipers that would show up at Jan Hus's sermons, they're just average everyday folks. And they, once they started to become aware of some of the things that were going on in the church was like, we gotta silence this guy. And so Jan Hus actually ends up getting burned at the stake because of his, the church basically said, you're a heretic. You're questioning the authority of the church, and, that's unacceptable. You're not a true Catholic, da-da-da-da-da. And they burn him at the stake. there was another piece that came out in the late 13, or rather in the early 1400s, in 1418, called The Imitation of Christ, and it was done by Thomas à Kempis, and so this encouraged Christians to live simply, okay, and make religion a personal experience. Again, that personal communion with God being emphasized by these church reformers. And then this guy is another important figure, and we're actually going to be doing a Hippo assignment on this guy today for the last part of class. We're going to read through this thing together, and talk a little bit about this piece that he wrote. Erasmus of Rotterdam is his name, okay? Erasmus of Rotterdam. And Erasmus of Rotterdam was, they often say of Erasmus, and it's on the slide here, that Erasmus laid the egg that Luther hatched. What do we mean by that? Well, Erasmus was one of these, he was born in the Dutch city of Rotterdam, but he lived around England and France most of his life. And he's one of these educated men who starts to become highly critical of some of the wrongdoings of the church. And so he started to criticize the corruption of the Roman Catholic Church and the hypocrisy of the clergy, and started arguing that the church really needed this period of moral reform in order to bring back the holiness of the Christian faith. And Martin Luther was well aware of Erasmus's work, and they were contemporaries of one another. Erasmus was a bit older than Martin Luther was, but Martin Luther was well read on the works by Erasmus, and so that's why people say that Luther was really the one who, because unlike Luther, Erasmus never formally broke away from the church. He remained Catholic. He remained working from within the infrastructure of the Roman Catholic Church to try to institute change from the top down, but never breaks away from the church. Whereas Luther initiated a break from the church, where he formally broke away from the church and established the first Protestant faith known as Lutheranism, which is still a Christian faith, but it's a new form of Christianity that breaks away from the Roman Catholic Church. And that causes, after Luther breaks away, it causes a lot of fragmentation in the church doctrine, because now you don't have that uniformity that you once had. The uniformity of the church was of utmost importance for the church to hold on to, and they lost it when Martin Luther broke away. Another argument that Erasmus makes is that the scriptures were a guide to life, very similar once again to John Wycliffe of England, who said that the Bible should be the sole authority. You should not have people taking the Bible, twisting its meanings, overextending and over-applying things, and so on. True religion was a matter of inward sincerity, he said, and pious devotion to God. Again, stressing that personal communion with God, okay? The personal relationship. Now, why does this happen at all? Why do people start to question the Roman Catholic Church? How were they able to break away from it? Well, Christian humanists of the Northern Renaissance criticized the church, okay? And question the validity of the Latin Vulgate, the Catholic Bible, okay? And these textual criticisms led to eventually new translations of the Bible, which undermined Catholic authority. And this is, a lot of it has to do with the Renaissance humanism that we saw happen in the last unit. This humanist movement starts in Italy, but it eventually makes its way all the way up to Northern Europe. And particularly after the printing press is invented, the Gutenberg printing press with movable type, and we start to see more and more printing presses being built and now distributing new reading materials to people. And remember, it gets invented in Germany in Gutenberg, and it proliferates. What we see is that more and more and more people start to become literate as they are reading texts. People that may have not been able to, in a previous century, acquire literacy, start to be able to read. And of course, one of the first things that they start to read in their own language is the Bible. And they start to say, you know, I'm looking through the Bible here and I'm not seeing anything that allows the Pope to put, you know, his favorite family members in office or whatever. You know, I'm not seeing anything in here that says that the church can require you to pay indulgences to absolve you of your sins. I don't see anything for that in here. How come the church is doing it, right? So the Italian Renaissance was at times kind of marked by a de-emphasis on religion, but in the North, the Renaissance kind of takes the shape of actually an emphasis on religion from these spiritual reformers who want to bring back, they want to bring back the holiness of the church. They want to bring the church back to where it was before. And this drew significant criticism of those who opposed the moral decline of the church. The thing about the Renaissance in the South was that you saw a lot of emphasis on, I mean, sure, there was a lot of religious emphasis too, but there was an emphasis on secularism. There was an emphasis on individualism amongst high church leaders. And the reformers in the North say, no, okay, we don't want emphasis on individualism. We want the church to return back to this place of moral sanctity. And we don't like this individualism because that's probably exactly what's contributing to the decline of the morality of the church. So they're trying to bring that morality back, all right? And they're doing so by reading through the Bible and figuring out, exactly what the Bible says you can and can't do. Another major reformer of this time was a guy named Ulrich Zwingli, and he was trained as a humanist and saw as a preacher, he used Erasmus's edition of the Greek New Testament to preach. Another reformer was John Calvin, and he was heavily influenced by humanism and particularly the writings of Erasmus, just like Martin Luther was. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the Gutenberg printing press helped to facilitate this spread of Northern humanism. And we saw a growing segment of the lay people, the worshipers, the regular common folk, who start to become educated and more willing themselves to criticize the church. Okay, before we move on to Martin Luther, at this time what I'm going to do is on the files section, I have to find this on my computer really quickly here. I'm going to drop this document into the primary resource. One second. One second. I'm going to click on the right folder here. Okay. So in the primary resources folder on the files section of Canvas, I just dropped a text that we're going to take a look at. It's called Erasmus Excerpts. Okay, Erasmus Excerpts. Now you saw on the previous slide, and I didn't talk much about it deliberately because we're going to look at it right now. One second, my computer is like figuring out what it wants to do. Okay, so I'm going to pop this open here. And as we go over to excerpts from the writings of Erasmus. Erasmus, on that one slide that we talked about Erasmus, you saw in there that he wrote a book called In Praise of Folly. Okay, In Praise of Folly. Now, if you've never heard of that phrase folly before, all folly is foolishness. Okay, foolishness. Now think about what the title is. In Praise of Foolishness, in praise of folly. Why would somebody praise foolishness? Well, it's kind of a sarcastic title. Okay, this is what we might call satire in a sense. Okay, think about Erasmus as being like a Reddit troll. Are you familiar with, I I don't know if anyone goes on Reddit or not, but on Reddit, there's a whole bunch of, I don't know what, people post all sorts of crazy stuff on there, memes, but also articles, pictures of dogs, and all sorts of crazy stuff. And you see people on there who get on there and they're just angry and they just flame everyone. Okay. This is what Erasmus did, but it was like, 15th century flaming. Okay. So he just gets on there. He just starts writing about all of the things that he looks around at society as just being absolutely foolish, and then eviscerates them, trolls them. Okay. That's essentially what this book is. And it's rather entertaining. Okay. So let's read through this together and talk a little bit about the writings of Erasmus and how these start to influence people and how they think about the church and also the structure of society at this time in Renaissance Europe. So Desiderius Erasmus was born in Rotterdam in Holland, which is a Dutch province, in 1466. He was ordained a priest in 1492, same year that Columbus set sail across the ocean, but left the monastic life 2 years later. He went to Paris to study theology in 1495 and then to England in 1499, where he became a very close friend of the northern humanist known as Thomas More, who wrote a piece called Utopia. He published the Enchiridion Militis Christianity, sure I pronounced that wrong, in 1501, which was an appeal for a return to the spirit of early Christianity. Again, remember, the reformer movement is trying to make the church great again, bring the church back to what it used to be, with its emphasis on mutual love, sharing, and the rejection of the pursuit of material riches. All right. In 1509, Erasmus wrote In Praise of Folly, which proved one of the most widely published and influential of all Renaissance humanist books. The book deals with all manner of secular and religious follies, both types of which he mercilessly mocked. In 1516, Erasmus published another hugely influential book, an edition of the New Testament based on his translation from the original Greek. It was this edition that would serve as the basis for the King James Version of the Bible in 1605. Erasmus's sharp criticism of church practices was influential in the early development of Martin Luther's thought. During the early years of the Reformation, it was written that Erasmus laid the egg that Luther hatched. As Luther developed his theology, however, he grew disenchanted with what he saw as Erasmus's equivocation. Equivocation is like flip-flopping or backing away from something. If you equivocate, it means that you're kind of sitting on the fence on something. Okay, so Luther, as he's developing his theology and starting to move towards breaking away from the church, he grew disenchanted with Erasmus. In other words, he started not to like him as much because he saw Erasmus, kind of flip-flopping or being a little bit too ambivalent over the church failings. Erasmus would not fundamentally condemn or leave the church, choosing to stay and work for reform from within. He warned that Luther's agitation would lead to a mass bloodshed, a prophecy that proved all too true, because what happens after Martin Luther breaks away and various others break away from the Roman Catholic Church is that we see these religious wars break out between Catholics and Protestants across Europe. Their relationship became very bitter towards the end of their lives. Erasmus died in 1536, and the below excerpts give a flavor for the range and character of his writings. So he this is, broken down into several different topics. So, In Praise of Folly, and the first section here is on war, okay? So he's talking about the foolishness of war, okay? And in the next one, on the foolishness of hunters, on the foolishness of philosophers, okay? And he's just basically criticizing all these different aspects of society. So on war, he says, I often wonder what thing it is that drives men to such a degree of madness as to rush with so much pains, so much cost, so much risk to the destruction of one another. For what are we doing all our lives but making war? The brute beasts do not all engage in war, but only some kinds. And those do not fight among themselves, but with animals of a different species. They fight too with their natural arms, and not like us with machines. And of course, he's talking about not like, the kinds of machines of war that we think of today, but simple machines of war, guns, cannons, swords, even cavalry, etc., upon which we expend an ingenuity worthy of devils. Consider, too, how many crimes are committed under the pretext of war, when, as they say, in the midst of arms, laws are silent. How many thefts, how many acts of sacrilege, how many rapes, how many other abuses which one is ashamed to even name. And this moral contagion cannot but last for many years, even when the war is over. What kingdom can you set against the lives and blood of so many thousand men? And it is followed by such a train of calamities, that there is good reason in the fiction of poets that war comes to us from hell and is sent by the Furies. Okay, so he's basically saying, war's dumb. Okay, and the way that humans fight is only to the destruction of man and only to the proliferation of sin. Okay, so that's kind of what he's saying there. On the next part, he goes on talking about hunters. Okay, among these to be ranked as the greatest of fools, such as taken a moderate delight in hunting, and think no music comparable to the sounding of horns and the yelping of beagles, and were they to require medication, would no doubt think that the most supreme virtues to be in the dried poop of a dog's tail. Okay, so he's just trolling these people right now. He's trolling hunters. Now, back in this day, the way that hunting worked was that hunting was only done by nobles. Okay, you had to be a noble to go and hunt. If you were going out and hunting on lands that weren't yours, you could be put to death for poaching, because killing rabbits, killing deer, whatever you could find out in the wilderness, those were not your animals to kill. Those were on the lands of the nobles, and protected, for noble hunting. So nobles had this whole ceremony surrounding hunting where they would get on horseback and they would use bows and arrows or other devices to go and hunt. And they would use bugles, and there would be all of these rituals surrounding the hunting, when you kill the animal, when you skin the animal, or whatever, and so on and so forth. And so he goes on and talks about, like, when they have run down their game, what strange pleasure they take in cutting of it up. Cows and sheep may be chopped by common butchers, but what is killed in hunting must be dismembered by none other than the rank of a gentleman, who shall fall devoutly on his knees, and drawing out a fancy sword after several ceremonies, shall dissect all the parts as artificially as the best skilled anatomist. While all that stand round shall watch this intently, and that he can but dip his finger and taste of the blood, shall think his own blood improved by it. So he's calling out hunters as being like, you guys are such knuckleheads. Okay, this is such a ridiculous ceremony. All right, of philosophers, next to these come the philosophers in their long beards and short cloaks, who esteem themselves the only possessors of wisdom, and look upon the rest of mankind as the dirt and rubbish of the creation. Yet these men's happiness is only a frantic craziness of brain. They build castles in the air and infinite worlds in a vacuum. They will give to you a hair's breadth of the dimensions of the sun, moon, and stars as easily as they would do that of a flagon or a saucepan. They will give punctual account of the creation of thunder, of the origins of winds, of the nature of eclipses, and all of the other abstruse difficulties in physics without the least demur or hesitation, as if they had been admitted into the inner council of creation. Alas, nature but does laugh at all their puny conjectures, for they never yet made one worthwhile discovery on which they are all unanimously agreed in each point of the smallest moment. So he's basically saying, look at how silly these philosophers are. thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, and they think they're so smart and they have all these different conversations, but they can never agree with one another on the smallest points, and they sit and they waste time and they're just talking and talking and they're full of hot air. Okay, so he's again criticizing philosophers now, and he goes on and on and on. So this gives you a good flavor for the kinds of parts of society that Erasmus was criticizing, right? That he was saying, like, look, there's a whole lot of things that are viewed as being so, oh my gosh, hunting, and philosophers and stuff. And he's like, these guys don't know any more than any of the rest of us. Okay. In fact, their little lives are so pathetic in the grand scheme of things, and they do this for the sake of self-importance. Okay. So, he's basically a troll, for lack of a better word. All right. So at this time, I've been going on and on and on, but I would like to give you guys some time now to digest what we've gone over today, and also to get started on the reading guide questions, which will be your assignment. And I will be doing a hippo on this one. There won't be any questions associated with this reading, but we are going to do a hippo assignment on this one, and that template is still up there for you. So you just download the same template, use the same template as you guys have been doing for previous hippo assignments, and then you're going to do one on this guy and talk a little bit about, his historical context he's coming from, obviously Northern Europe and the Protestant Reformation and so on and so forth, and how this fits into some of the things that we're talking about with this particular unit on the Protestant Reformation. But of course, before we go, I would like to take attendance. I think everybody's here because I see 16 people in here. So before we leave today, how about I have you guys answer the question of, what's a good question for today? Let's go with, what have I not yet asked? What is, oh gosh. I'm having a hard time coming up with a question today. How about this? I can't think of a random question today. I feel like I've asked all the questions that I can think to ask. What's a good question? Anyone got a good question? Yeah, we did that one. Favorite way of sleeping. Sure, why not? Let's do it. Favorite way of sleeping. What's your favorite book or show? We'll do that one next time. That's a good one too. What's your favorite way to sleep? On your back, on your side, on your stomach? What's your favorite way of sleeping? On the right side. On the side, upside down. That's like a bat or something. Side sleeper, sleeping on the side. I'm mostly a side sleeper myself. Sometimes, though, back. I feel like I breathe better. Getting old. They say it's not good to sleep on your stomach. I don't know why that is, though. They say it's not good to sleep on your stomach, but yeah, I mean, I wish I could. I wouldn't be able to breathe, though, if I was sleeping on my stomach. Very good, folks. Well, that brings us to the end of today's lecture. So I'll post those questions for you. Do get started on them, and we will meet back here on Friday. Get those questions done by Friday if you could, please, because there will be more questions for the weekend. So please, please, please do them. Get them done so that you're not falling behind on work. All right, folks. Make good decisions. Have a great day.